James Ewell Brown, Jeb. Stuart was a United States Army officer from the U.S. state of Virginia who later became a Confederate States Army general during the American Civil War. He was known to his friends as Jeb, from the initials of his given names. Stuart was a cavalry commander known for his mastery of reconnaissance and the use of cavalry in support of offensive operations. While he cultivated a cavalier image, his serious work made him the trusted eyes and ears of Robert E. Lee's army and inspired Southern morale. Stuart graduated from West Point in 1854 and served in Texas and Kansas with the U.S. Army, a veteran of the frontier conflicts with Native Americans and the violence of Bleeding Kansas. He participated in the capture of John Brown at Harper's Ferry. Resigning when his home state of Virginia seceded, he served first under Stonewall Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley, but then in increasingly important cavalry commands of the Army of Northern Virginia, playing a role in all of that army's campaigns until his death. He established a reputation as an audacious cavalry commander and on 2 occasions circumnavigated the Union Army of the Potomac, bringing fame to himself and embarrassment to the North. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, he distinguished himself as a temporary commander of the wounded Stonewall Jackson's infantry corps. Arguably Stuart's most famous campaign, Gettysburg, was marred when he was surprised by a Union cavalry attack at the Battle of Brandy Station and by his separation from Lee's army for an extended period, leaving Lee unaware of Union troop movements and contributing to the Confederate defeat at the Battle of Gettysburg. Stuart received significant criticism from the Southern press as well as the postbellum proponents of the Lost Cause movement, but historians have failed to agree on whether Stuart's exploit was entirely the fault of his judgment or simply bad luck and Lee's less than explicit orders. During the 1864 Overland Campaign, Union March, Gen. Philip Sheridan's cavalry launched an offensive to defeat Stuart, who was mortally wounded at the Battle of Yellow Tavern. His widowed wife wore black for the rest of her life in remembrance of her deceased husband. Early life. Stuart was born at Laurel Hill Farm, a plantation in Patrick County, Virginia, near the border with North Carolina. He was of Scottish-American and Scots-Irish background. He was the 8th of 11 children and the youngest of the 5 sons to survive past early age. His great-grandfather, Major Alexander Stuart, commanded a regiment at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse during the American Revolutionary War. His father, Archibald Stuart, was a War of 1812 veteran, slaveholder, attorney, and Democratic politician who represented Patrick County in both houses of the Virginia General Assembly, and also served 1 term in the United States House of Representatives. Archibald was a cousin of Alexander Hugh Holmes Stuart. Elizabeth Letcher Pannell Stuart, Jeb's mother, who was known as a strict religious woman with a good sense for business, ran the family farm. Education. Stuart was educated at home by his mother and tutors until the age of 12, when he left Laurel Hill to be educated by various teachers in Wytheville, Virginia, and at the home of his Aunt Anne and her husband Judge James Ewell Brown at Danville. He entered Emory and Henry College when he was 15, and attended from 1848 to 1850. During the summer of 1848, Stuart attempted to enlist in the U.S. Army, but was rejected as underaged. He obtained an appointment in 1850 to the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, from Representative Thomas Hamlet Averett, the man who had defeated his father in the 1848 election. Stuart was a popular student and was happy at the academy. Although not handsome in his teen years, his classmates called him by the nickname Beauty, which they described as his personal comeliness in inverse ratio to the term employed. He possessed a chin so short and retiring as positively to disfigure his otherwise fine countenance. He quickly grew a beard after graduation, and a fellow officer remarked that he was the only man he ever saw that a bid improved. Robert E. Lee was appointed superintendent of the Academy in 1852, and Stuart became a friend of the Lee family, seeing him socially on frequent occasions. Lee's nephew, Fitzhugh Lee, also arrived at the Academy in 1852. In Stuart's final year, in addition to achieving the cadet rank of second captain of the corps, he was one of 8 cadets designated as honorary cavalry officers for his skills in horsemanship. Stuart graduated 13th in his class of 46 in 1854. He ranked 10th in his class in cavalry tactics. Although he enjoyed the civil engineering curriculum at the Academy and did well in mathematics, his poor drawing skills hampered his engineering studies, and he finished 29th in that discipline. A Stuart family tradition says he deliberately degraded his academic performance in his final year to avoid service in the elite, but dull, Corps of Engineers, United States Army. Stuart was commissioned a brevet second lieutenant and assigned to the U.S. Regiment of Mounted Riflemen in Texas. After an arduous journey, he reached Fort Davis on January 28, 1855, and was a leader for 3 months on scouting missions over the San Antonio to El Paso Road. He was soon transferred to the newly formed 1st Cavalry Regiment at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas Territory, where he became regimental quartermaster and commissary officer under the command of Col. Edwin V. Sumner. He was promoted to first lieutenant in 1855. Also in 1855, Stuart met Flora Cook, the daughter of the commander of the 2nd U.S. Dragoon Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Street. George Cook. Burke Davis described Flora as an accomplished horsewoman, and though not pretty, an effective charmer, to whom Stuart succumbed with hardly a struggle. They became engaged in September, less than 2 months after meeting. Stuart humorously wrote of his rapid courtship in Latin, Veni, Vidi, Victus Sum. Although a gala wedding was planned for Fort Riley, Kansas, the death of Stuart's father on September 20 caused a change of plans, and the marriage on November 14 was small and limited to family witnesses. The couple owned 2 slaves until 1859, one inherited from his father's estate, the other purchased. Stuart's leadership capabilities were soon recognized. He was a veteran of the frontier conflicts with Native Americans and the antebellum violence of Bleeding, Kansas. He was wounded on July 29, 1857, while fighting at Solomon River, Kansas, against the Cheyenne. Col. Sumner ordered a charge with drawn sabers against a wave of Indian arrows, scattering the warriors. Stuart and 3 other lieutenants chased one down, whom Stuart wounded in the thigh with his pistol. The Cheyenne turned and fired at Stuart with an old-fashioned pistol, striking him in the chest with a bullet, which did little more damage than to pierce the skin. Stuart returned in September to Fort Leavenworth and was reunited with his wife. Their first child, a girl, had been born in 1856 but died the same day. On November 14, 1857, Flora gave birth to another daughter, whom the parents named Flora after her mother. The family relocated in early 1858 to Fort Riley, where they remained for 3 years. In 1859, Stuart developed a new piece of cavalry equipment, for which he received patent number 25684 on October 4, a saber hook, or an improved method of attaching sabers to belts. The U.S. government paid Stuart $5,000 for a right-to-use license, and Stuart contracted with Knorr, Nesser & Co. of Philadelphia to manufacture his hook. While in Washington, D.C., to discuss government contracts, and in conjunction with his application for an appointment into the Quartermaster Department, Stuart heard about John Brown's raid on the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry. Stuart volunteered to be aide-de-camp to Col. Robert E. Lee and accompanied Lee with a company of U.S. Marines from the Washington Navy Yard and 4 companies of Maryland militia. While delivering Lee's written surrender ultimatum to the leader of the group, who had been calling himself Isaac Smith, Stuart recognized Old Ossawa Tommy Brown from his days in Kansas. Stuart was promoted to captain on April 22, 1861, but resigned from the U.S. Army on May 3, 1861, to join the Confederate States Army, following the secession of Virginia. Upon learning that his father-in-law, Carl Cook, would remain in the U.S. Army during the coming war, Stuart wrote to his brother-in-law, "He will regret it but once, and that will be continuously." On June 26, 1860, Flora gave birth to a son, Philip Street George Cook Stuart, but his father changed the name to James Ewell Brown Stuart, Jr. in late 1861 out of disgust with his father-in-law.